One of the hardest and most important questions in a family business is who should lead next. But just as critical is how that transition happens and what role the family plays in shaping the future. My guest today is Jen Traeger, second-generation owner of United Skates of America, the largest roller skating rink company in the world. And she's also a family business coach who helps other leaders navigate growth and strategy in complex family systems. In this episode, Jen shares how her family made the rare decision to invest in non-family executive leadership, not just once, but twice, and how the strategy of growing talent from within has helped make their operating company into a national brand. We talk about the difference between ownership and stewardship, how to grow leaders from within, and why letting go of operational control doesn't mean that you have to let go of impact. Plus, Henry jumps in with his questions about roller rinks and learns just how much sugar is in a single cloud of cotton candy. All this and more coming up on Building Unbreakable Brands. Welcome to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast where we talk to business leaders with a generational mindset. I'm Meghan Lynch. I'm an advisor to family businesses and CEO of 6 Point Strategy, which helps generational brands honor their past while evolving for the future. Today, my guest is Jen Traeger, second-generation leader of United Skates of America and a certified coach who draws on 2 decades of family business experience to help leaders navigate growth, succession, and strategy inside complex family systems. Welcome, Jen. So excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Meghan. Excited to be here.
So I was hoping that we could start with the origin story. United Skates of America was founded by your dad. So what was the original vision and what made it more than kind of just a business in your family?
Let's see. My dad started the business in 1971. Prior to that, he actually had a printed T-shirt business that he was in partnership with my mom's brother. They were very successful and ended up selling that to a public company. He then was looking for another business to go into. And, the beginning of the 70s, end of the 60s, it was the disco era. And I think he saw a lot of opportunity in roller skating and family entertainment. Although I think at the time he was more interested in an adult skating population. And over the years, it's definitely evolved into participatory recreational for kids 4 to 14 and their families.
So did you skate a lot growing up? Did you grow up in the rink or?
You know what? I really didn't, which is interesting because in this industry, there's so many without being derogatory, sort of mom and pop rinks that either the parents were figure skaters or they raced and they wanted to have a place to do that. There are many multi-generational roller skating rinks, but I didn't spend a ton of time in the rinks. I mean, I certainly had birthday parties. I would go like everyone else did with their school classes for parties. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually started working, in roller skating rinks and for the family business.
That's definitely interesting because, I was kind of picturing what a cool family business to grow up in. You let all the friends in after hours. And so I'm curious, did you see a trajectory for the company growing? Because it's now grown to the largest roller skating company in the world, right? So did you see that growth trajectory? Was that planned? Was it organic? How did that happen?
I mean, I think, early on in the business, and when I say early on, in the first 10 to 15 years, there was a rapid growth. I think my dad saw a lot of opportunity. He's both to scale the business, but also a big part of our business model has always been to own the real estate or the majority of the real estate that the roller skating rinks are in. And, in the 70s and early 80s, acquiring real estate and 20,000 foot clear span buildings or building buildings, from the ground up was way more cost effective than it is today. And there was one of the strategies has been to either build or buy facilities in areas that, other retail doesn't necessarily want to go into, C or D type real estate, and then run roller skating rinks in those buildings until, the value of the real estate changes, and then selling opportunistically, and then, building in another place. Or it's too expensive to build at this point. We're really either acquiring roller skating rinks that people are, looking to sell, or very rarely now, but it used to be a big play was to, go into old grocery stores, because for a roller skating rink, you need, like I said, at least 20,000 square feet, and you don't want to have a bunch of poles in. Right. So clear span. So I think the strategy initially was around growing the roller skating business. And then over time, I think my dad recognized that where the wealth was going to be generated was more in the real estate. And for many years, well, through the 70s and 80s, the roller skating business was very, very profitable. And then it became fairly cyclical in the 90s and the early 2000s. And that's true of the industry. But we were always like, okay, if we can just make sure the operating business is healthy enough to pay the rent, that was a major strategy. And then, and let me know if I'm getting too far afield, but we did really, really well prior to the pandemic. Then the pandemic happened, and, it was not a good time to be in a business that people are breathing heavily when it's an aerosol pandemic. But after that, we really started to see enormous profitability. And I think there's several factors. And I'm going to say, the biggest factor, while our previous CEO was fantastic, our current CEO, who has grown up in our business, is really just sort of setting the world on fire. She and our entire team. It's the best team we've ever had in the 54-year history of the business.
That's amazing. And I think that really kind of points to something that I wanted to get to, because I think a lot of family businesses only bring in non-family leadership either very late in the company, multi-generations in, or when there's some kind of crisis or turnaround situation. But your family really made a different choice where you developed leadership from within, and you've transitioned from one non-family CEO to another non-family CEO. And as you said, has been somebody who's really grown up in the business and has grown a team along with them. How did you guys make that work, or why did you choose that strategy versus either having family stay in charge or hiring somebody from the outside?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I do find it, unusual, and it was a very intentional choice. One, going back to my dad as founder, he is not an operator, and he would be the first one to tell you that. He is an entrepreneur through and through. So while he was always growing, United States of America, he constantly had other venture businesses. He had a whole venture arm. Some were more successful than the other. But I think one of the reasons for having a non-family CEO was because my dad simply recognized what he liked to do, what he was good at, and what he was not good at. I think the reason my sister, my brother, and I either didn't join the business or joined the business later in life, it wasn't that we didn't talk about business in our family system. I mean, it was some of my dad's sayings were like, don't spend the principal. Like, we were constantly talking about, what it means to have affluence, what it means to be a fiduciary. Like, that was just a part of our, dining room table conversation all the time. I think my dad always spoke about wanting, he uses the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, and, is it 2 generations, 1 generation, which, it's not my favorite saying, because I think it puts a lot of pressure on the next generation. So there was always conversation around how do we make sure this business provides the same resources that it did for, my family of origin, generation 2, which is my siblings and I and our children. And then how will we get it to go to generation 3, 4, etc. But it wasn't by actively operating in the business unless someone wanted to. I mean, when I joined the business in 2006, I did it because I didn't want to be quote unquote a trust funder. I wanted to feel like we often talk about, my dad and my mom loaded the bases. They came from no money, either lower or middle class. And then our job was not necessarily to do home runs. We've always been fairly conservative, but to keep the bases loaded. And I wanted to add value to that. I wanted to participate so that, I could feel good about, all right, I'm getting it from Gen 1 to Gen 2, helping with the transition and really feeling comfortable that these financial resources that I was so lucky, by just, being born at the time I did to the people I did, that I actually contributed to that. So it wasn't just sort of a genetic lottery, so to speak.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like from both the way your dad approached it of like, passing off the things that, the kind of managerial things that was not his strength and kind of focusing on the visionary and the building, and then also really imparting to you guys almost like the work of ownership, that it's not, the stewardship of assets, what it takes to do that well, and that it's not something that's a passive, I own it and therefore I just, kick back and do nothing and benefit from it, that instead there's work to be done, right, with that. And it's a job in and of itself to be an owner and a fiduciary and a steward of what the family's built.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, we all have a work ethic, of working hard regardless of what we choose to do. It was always like, follow your passion. And, I think he also didn't want us to feel that we had to work in the family business. I mean, it did get to a point where he asked me to join the family business. I think he was starting to get concerned about how we were going to make this transition, and this is in late 2006, early 2007, like how we were going to make the transition from our former CEO and himself to the next generation of leadership. But I was always clear, like, roller skating isn't my passion. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and like live and breathe roller skating. I could have been the CEO had I chosen, but I wanted the best fit for the company. I'm certainly passionate about, the business that we've created. I think we bring a lot of value to the communities we serve. I think, in a age where there's so much, childhood obesity, families not recreating together, a lot of digital screen time, I think we offer a very affordable experience. I mean, when you think about going to a movie theater, how much people spend to sit for an hour and a half, we're sort of the best deal out there in terms of cost per hour and just the amount of exercise kids get. So, not to go stray too far, I spent almost 10 years or 6 years working in the operation business. I mean, I literally, when you said, did you, spend a lot of time in the roller skating rink, my training, and, this is at a 35-year-old, was like, I did all the part-time positions. I mean, I remember working as a birthday party hostess. And, this 16-year-old was like, wow, you're really good at this. You're really good on the cash register. And at the time I had a master's in accounting, and I just sort of smiled. But I think it speaks to the work ethic, like, start at the bottom, no nepotism. I always felt like I'm going to try to show up and work harder or as hard as anybody else. And it's, people are not choosing, like, am I going to go work for a tech company or be the general manager of a roller skating rink? I mean, there's multiple revenue channels. you're working with 300 people in a session, your average age is 14 to 18-year-old, kids. And what, teenagers, they're both a joy to work with and can have challenges. So, I have a lot of respect for the people that do work within the business. And it's been a joy to work alongside of them, at different times. I think I really understand what it takes to run the business. I'm also very happy that I got to choose to watch the business grow and be successful, but now to sort of be pursuing sort of the things that I am passionate about.
You're listening to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast all about brand stewardship and crafting an enduring legacy. I'm speaking with Jen Traeger, second-generation owner of the United States of America. So you had mentioned that your passion isn't the day-to-day, like running, being in a roller skating rink multiple hours in a day, but that is your team's passion, right? Like the executive team that's running the business now. I'm curious how did you need to put anything into place to cultivate executive skills, or is like the passion for the business really the key?
Great question. One thing that I'm really proud of, whether you're a part-time associate, working behind the cafe cash register, or you're a part-time manager, or you're a general manager, or you're a vice president, we've always taught financial literacy. People, we've taught what is revenue, what are expenses, what are cost of goods, what is a profit. They see a lot of our numbers. There's a lot of transparency. And whether they decide to stay within the roller skating business or, go out and do another business, I think that's a skill, a life, financial literacy. We're not teaching that in the high schools, or at least not to my knowledge. So I think that's something I've always been proud of. I think, in terms of developing people from within, we've gotten sort of lucky. And, maybe it's not luck. Maybe it's because, whether it was our former CEO or our current CEO or all the different managers, over time, that it's been a good place to work. People are treated, we talk a lot about having ownership mentality, wanting our first customer are our skaters, and our second customer are the people that work for us. And how do we make it a great place to work? I certainly think, as I think about our executive team, I talk to my siblings. So the three of us, I have an older sister and a younger brother. We're majority partners. Our former CEO is cycling out. We're buying him out. And our current CEO has some equity, will continue to earn more. But we talk about how do we make this the best job Karen, who's our CEO, could ever want for herself? How can this be the best job for our other executives? And a lot of it is sharing in the success. And then another saying my dad always has is, it's easy to be good time partners. It's easy to, be there when things are going well, but let's be bad time partners, meaning when the business is bad, when there's struggles. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens in roller skating rinks. Some of the stories are insane, but even around the pandemic or during down cycles in the business, we've been very lucky. Another thing is my dad never wanted to be over leveraged. So a lot of the real estate we own outright, but in those down cycles, we had the ability from a landlord perspective to either defer or forgive rent because we control the operation side too. So, back to your original question around how has leadership development happened in our business? I think some of it is luck, some of it is strategy, us understanding that, looking at a long history, that our best people have always been developed from within. We've done some work around like what qualities does a person have to be a good leader? A lot of it is a passion for roller skating. A lot of it is passion for kids. We've done well with people that were former teachers. And a lot of it has been like, I don't want to say throwing ourselves at the feet of certain people, but like, it's hard when you have, for instance, I can think of one person who, college educated, had been working with us since she was 16, was considering making this. We wanted her to be executive. We saw a huge future. And her parents were like, you're going to work in a roller skating rink? Like, how is that possible? You can't make a career out of that. And, really not only walking her through how that was going to look, but also like sitting down with her parents and saying, we see a ton of opportunity for this person and we understand your reservations, but we're going to help you understand better, like what it means to be the world's largest roller skating company. It's not just a one-off facility in Long Island, but this is a national brand.
Yeah, that must have been so meaningful to them to, almost like a show of trust, right? Like that, that you care as much about her future as, maybe not as much as her own parents, but, that there's like a shared care and investment in what's going on. And there aren't too many companies where they would come and talk to your family about those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, I think, we're talking about family business and building a legacy within a family business. I think one of the things that I'm very proud about is that we treat our executives and, general managers as family. When we were going through the pandemic and, we were having to lay off initially people that had been with us for 20 years, we were like looking at every way that we could continue to compensate them. So there's a lot of different examples, whether it's, somebody has gotten ill and we've paid their medical bills or helped someone get through school. Those are really important values that we have as a company and that, we have as a family. So there's overlap between that value system.
Yeah. Yeah. Hearing a lot of empathy too, and like the way you're approaching, really trying to see it from the other person's view of like, what would make this the best place to work? Who else do we need to convince that this is the right move? Just really thinking about it from a variety of angles. And I think that's not always easy to do, even if you're a very people-centered business, to still get out of your own head and start to see it from somebody else's perspective. So I'd imagine that probably also has a lot to do with the culture that you've built and the ability to kind of attract and retain talent.
Yeah. And I think, important too is just not micromanaging, like when you have a good leader, letting them lead.
Yeah.
And, I think that is something that we have from, the family side of the business. I think from the board perspective, we don't get into, micromanaging how our CEO leads. And we only sort of get involved from a place of like, how can we add value? How can we, help bring the business forward? And then, certainly when the pandemic happened, at the time I was actually cycling out of the operations business and my brother had never been in it. He had always been on the real estate development side. And we just got to work. It was like, I've always been built that like, I'll do anything. I've cleaned out toilets in the roller skating rink. I've gotten on my hands and knees and scrubbed the wall. It's just, it's like lead by example, even if you're doing a medial task. But we were certainly like, we want people to feel that we're in it as much as they are. And not to mention, my dad always said we were never going to lose the family business during the pandemic. I can tell you it didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
Especially when we were not initially able to get PPP money, which, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, I can imagine that had to be so tough, especially with something that's so, as you said, like the exact opposite of what people wanted during the pandemic, and to just figure out a way to just come out on the other side and still keep your values intact and feel good about what you're doing. But I'm sure that you guys also found some creative ways to serve each other and be present for each other. And, as you said, kind of like roll up your sleeves and get back in and do what needed to be done. You've mentioned a couple of times about the real estate strategy that has been kind of a critical success factor in the growth of the business. And I've heard a couple of like interesting things. One with it, this kind of strategy of seeing this like opportunistic approach of like, oh, we could go in and rent out a space and like help to build up its value, maybe even help to be part of revitalizing a community, and then have the opportunity to then move to another location or sell that real estate and then reinvest in growth. And then also this almost like buffer opportunity to help kind of like the good of the whole, like kind of treating the company more as like an organism where you're like, oh, we can forgive some rent over here, but this location is doing better. And so you kind of keep the whole organization strong by kind of having some more flexibility in how you're running it. Do you see real estate as being a critical opportunity that other family businesses might be missing? Because I don't know if some of those strategies would be immediately obvious to everyone.
I mean, I can't speak to, do I think other family businesses are missing that? But I can say absolutely that, like, how the family has generated the most amount of wealth is from acquiring real estate, having an operating business that we control, cash flow the real estate, and then over time, selling that real estate and acquiring new real estate. So it's been, we would often say, and it's not true now because the operating business is doing so well, but for many, many years, my dad would say, the operating business takes 80% of the time and effort and provides 20% of the profit versus the real estate that takes 20% time and provides 80%, of the cash flow. So it's been, and I think he would think, my dad tends to be very difficult on himself. I mean, you were asking about the real estate, so over the course of our company's history, which is we started in 71, we've owned 65, 66 roller skating rinks because we numbered them all. I think of all of those, some of them we do municipal partnerships. So that's a whole nother story. But on the private ones, we've only ever rented one building. All of the rest have been owned, and sold. So like right now we only have 20 and 2 or 3 that we don't operate, but we own the real estate. And my dad, one will talk about, oh, the one I didn't buy. But also, he said, I should have known earlier in the business cycle that really it was a real estate play, not as much a roller skating business operational play. I think he did just fine. I mean, I'm also a daddy's girl. So I think, my dad walks on water and could do no wrong. All of that being said, I think anyone from the outside would look at my father's success and acknowledge that it's very impressive, which, is also, I think, a very interesting conversation around Gen 1 to Gen 2 transition. How do you get out of a founder's shadow as a Generation 2 person and create your own identity?
Yeah, well, I know that now you're coaching other family business leaders through complex transitions like that. I'm curious if you have, or either you have an approach or a philosophy or something that you would encourage people to clarify before they move forward with a transition like that. Anything that they should figure out about themselves, the business, the family, before they approach a transition?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first and foremost, and, I don't want to feel like I'm, marketing my services or anyone else's, but, we did a lot sort of by ourselves around transition and succession. And I think we did it very well, but I think we did not choose the easiest path. Meaning there's a lot of people who specialize in family business succession, that are much further down the river of experience that I am. But regardless, having someone that acts as a neutral third party that's able to support this transition, to help, with sometimes what are difficult conversations, to help get family members within a generation or between generation aware of their values, aware of what the legacy the founder generation might want, understanding sort of what the next generation, what their priorities are. I think what I've discovered tends to be an obstacle is particularly in the founding generation, and this was not true with my father, which is also why it's a little unusual, but they're so self-identified with the business. And while they, I think, cognitively want to do succession and transition, I don't think they're really ready for it, meaning psychologically. That they're not psychologically prepared. So I think it requires a lot of coaching, both of the founder or with the founder, and also of, the next gen leaders of, okay, how do you figure out what the right time is? How do you, create space and trust so that, you don't want the Gen 2 leaders to walk away because they're not able to really take a leadership role. And it's also, you have to understand psychologically how difficult it is for the founder to step away. Or even, I struggle to get founders to put processes on paper, to sort of unload what's going on in their brain, because it's just so second nature to them.
Yeah.
And then they don't understand why the Gen 2 isn't doing the job they want them to be doing. So, there's a lot of complications that happen. So I guess the takeaway is get support, give each other grace, know that, it's not a straight line, and, it's going to take some time, have a long runway. My dad really, we started this transition that wasn't, we bought the business about 10 years ago. The transition in leadership happened at the end of 2019. We started all of that when I joined the company in 2007. So, I don't know that a transition needs to take that long. And my dad, I want to reiterate, was very clear that he wanted to, in his lifetime, step away from the business, see it transition to the next generation, and spend more time hiking with me than, working behind his desk.
Yeah, I do think you're 100% right, though, that there can be a difference between intellectually, yes, of course, that's what I want to do. But then emotionally, that switch from having your whole identity almost feeling stripped away in some ways it's a big emotional shift. And I do think is one that people can often dismiss too much, oh no, it's not that emotional, but then when you get down to it, of course it is, you can't really help it.
Right. And I think that's sort of one of the skills I bring to the coaching, is really sort of listening to what's being said, and then also listening to what's not being said, and then having sort of compassion for both sides, and helping the others, both sides understand and provide grace, that this is complicated. And like you said, even though you sort of cognitively want one thing, to have the emotions meet up, and not everybody wants to talk about the emotional piece,
Exactly.
Even in coaching, they don't want it to feel like therapy. They want to feel like it's coaching, although, sometimes the line is very thin between the two.
For sure. Yeah. And I love this, the idea of just making a plan to give yourself grace and the other person grace. I think that makes any transition in any way, whether you're talking about a G1 to G2 or a family CEO to a non-family CEO, any of those there's lots of space for grace in those spaces. So I love it.
Yeah, I often think about, and I have a really close relationship with our current CEO, Karen, as does my brother. But, I always wonder, God, what is it like for her having, watching two siblings working together. I think we're generally do a good job with one another. But someone said to me once, like, the reason, as siblings, you can press each other's buttons is because you created them. So I think Josh and I have always worked really hard to keep that in check. But sometimes in stressful or heightened emotional situations, it leaks.
For sure. Can't help that. You're listening to Building Unbreakable Brands, the podcast for leaders with a generational mindset. I'm speaking with Jen Traeger, who uses her 20 years of experience working in her generational family business to coach other family business executives on complex transitions. And now my son Henry is going to come on and ask Jen his questions and probably share a roller skating story of his own. So
I was roller skating once. It was a couple weeks ago. And this happened to me.
Oh no.
So
that's interesting. I've never seen a broken wrist from a kid that's roller skating in the entire time I've been in the roller skating business.
really,
It's the first one ever. No, we see them all the time. We actually, in our business, people have to wear wrist guards for that very reason.
yeah,
Are you right-handed?
no,
Hey, I'm left-handed too. So at least you
Yes.
have your writing hand.
southpaws.
Yeah. Woo.
All right. There we go.
I'm glad you're okay. I'm sorry it happened to you. And I'm glad it wasn't in one of our rinks. We hate that type of accidents happening to our guests.
Yeah. Welcome to the podcast. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, then do a joke, and I'm going to be gone. So, how many people come to the rink daily?
Daily? Well, we have 20 plus rinks. So I think an easier answer would be that we serve over 2 million guests a year. So you want to do the math? I think it would take too long. You work on that and get back to me. But roughly, it depends on the day. It depends on where the rink is located. Big session is going to have 300 to 400 people, particularly like on Saturdays and Sundays. And we might have, an early morning session that doesn't have a ton of people, and then a midday session, and then an afternoon session and an evening session. So it can, be 1,000 to 2,000 people at a busy rink in a day.
All right. How many people can fit in the rink?
It depends on the rink. Some rinks have one capacity, other rinks have another capacity. I will say, we have a system that, like, for instance, not so how many people are allowed in the skating rink. I mean, we have to stay, like, if there's a 600 person capacity as per building permit laws and the local ordinances, we have to honor that. But we will do, if there's X amount of skaters, for every 100 skaters, we have X amount of skate guards on the floor so that we can try to keep the skate floor under control, because we want everybody to be having fun. And, when someone falls, we don't want people running over them. We don't want accidents to happen. We spend a lot of time in the leaders in not only the roller skating industry, but in the family fun industry on how to reduce liability. Do you know what the word liability means?
No.
It means, how do we reduce people not only getting hurt, so reducing accidents, but if there are accidents, how do we reduce the amount of times people sue us?
Yeah. All right. The last question has already been answered, but I'm going to ask you it anyways. Is there only one rink in the world of your company?
Nope. So in the history of the company, which started, I was telling your mom, in 1971, we've had 66 rinks. Today, we have, and I can never remember if it's 21 or 20. And then we own a couple more that we own the real estate, but other people operate. That's why we are the largest roller skating company in the entire world. Nobody else can say that but our company.
Wow, that's big responsibility.
It is. And it's also, it's a lot of fun making sure or hoping that 2 million guests a year have a fun, friendly, safe place to go skating.
Yeah, it's funny. Speaking of responsibility, for the first time, I just saw the first Spider-Man this morning.
Oh, what'd you think?
It was really good.
I'll tell you a funny story. And I don't know that this is too old for you. Do you know what the hokey pokey is? Okay, you put your right arm in, you put your right arm out. I thought my dad, who started the company, wrote the hokey pokey till I was a sophomore in college. He didn't, by the way.
All right, now for the joke.
Oh, I'm ready. I hope it's funny.
What kind of music do roller skating rinks play?
I don't know, Henry. What kind of music do they play?
Rock and roll.
Did you make that up yourself?
Either my dad came up with it or he found it off the internet or something.
I like that it's a family affair. So if you ever come skating in one of our rinks, you can have cotton candy for life. Do you know how much sugar you need to make a gigantic thing of cotton candy?
How much?
Like 1 tablespoon. It's spun sugar. So they just spin it really fast. So it becomes like this big thing. But in reality, it's just 1 tablespoon of sugar.
Yeah. Well, you're out of luck. I'm not a big fan of it.
Gosh, you just saved me so much money.
All right. That just about wraps it up.
All right.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you. Take care of that arm.
Nice to meet you too. I will. All right. Bye.
Have a great rest of your summer.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This was a really great conversation. I think there's a ton of value here. And if people want to learn more about your coaching practice or how to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can come to my website, which is execfamilybusinesscoach.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn, Jen Traeger.
Right. Great. We'll link both of those in the show notes. And thanks again, Jen. Really, really great to talk with you. And thanks so much for sharing your great experience with us and bringing so much value. Appreciate you.
One of the most powerful takeaways from this conversation with Jen was how her family has used real estate as a deliberate generational strategy. By developing and owning the properties where United Skates operates, they've created a real ecosystem that supports long-term stability. That kind of creative thinking is something more family businesses could be considering as part of their brand and business architecture. I also love how Jen's family has really separated the rules of ownership from the rules of management, but are also thinking about both as active roles that can add value in different ways. If you're a family business owner thinking about succession, growth, or what role real estate could play in your long-term planning, Jen's story is a thoughtful case study in how to think big and build wisely. To connect with Jen or learn more about her coaching and speaking work, visit execfamilybusinesscoach.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else navigating succession or strategy, and don't forget to leave us a review. It really helps more people discover the podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Building Unbreakable Brands.